Welcome to BL Stories, where romance, drama, and unforgettable boys' love come to life. Love knows no limits, and the best stories aren't always straight. Subscribe now and join our growing BL-loving family. Chicago presents a harsh and challenging environment for the Valentine family, who struggle both with their large household and limited financial resources. The family's primary income relies on the mother's occupation as a sex worker, which complicates their everyday living and social standing. Among the siblings, Alexander, a 14-year-old middle child, grapples with typical adolescent issues, including his identity and future aspirations, alongside an awakening curiosity about his sexuality. Similarly, Nolan, who lives nearby but is not part of the Valentine family, faces his own set of challenges with a modest family and income. However, he finds solace in astronomy, books, and his close friendship with Alexander, which often leads them into mischief together. Their shared experiences reflect the struggles and complexities of youth within a tumultuous and economically strained backdrop. Chapter 1. Xander groans loudly and tosses a pillow at his brother's head. "It's our turn, idiot," he snaps. Outside, the weather couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. It was cold, but not cold enough for snow, so the rain turned into sleet, leaving the front lawn covered in slushy patches. Inside the Valentine house, it was just as uncomfortable. The heat still hadn't been turned on, and Xander was convinced it never would be. He would have done it himself if he weren't afraid of getting yelled at. Nolan laughs at Xander's frustration and gently grabs his elbow. "Let's just go to your room instead," he suggests. "No," Xander says firmly, pulling his arm free. "I told you we were gonna play Xbox, and that's exactly what we're gonna do." They had both been excited all day. After school, all Xander could think about was finally getting home and playing. Unfortunately, his brother Jeremy had already claimed the Xbox and refused to give it up. One of the things Xander hated most about having such a crowded house, 5 siblings, not even counting their parents, was how nothing was ever shared fairly. The Xbox, the TV, the bathroom, everything was always a battle. Xander had forced himself to stay in class all day just for this. Nolan had promised that if Xander made it through the entire school day for once, they'd play Xbox together as long as he wanted. Even without the promise, Nolan would have played with him anyway. He was disappointed they couldn't, but he didn't let it bother him too much. "Come on," Nolan says again, this time holding Xander's elbow more firmly and guiding him down the hall. "We're going to your room." Xander shoots a glare over his shoulder at his brother as they pass. "You're impossible," he mutters. Nolan chuckles and pulls Xander into his room, kicking the door shut behind them. Xander lets out a long sigh and flops onto his bed, lying on his back with his legs hanging off the edge. "I just wanted to play Xbox," he mumbles. Nolan grins and climbs onto the bed beside him, lying on his stomach. He props his head up with his hands and looks down at Xander. "I know, tragic. Truly the worst thing that could happen to a person," he teases. Xander glares at him and raises a hand like he's about to swat him. "Oh, shut up," he says, trying not to laugh. He drops his hand onto his stomach. "You know what I mean. Jeremy stayed home all day playing while I was stuck at school." Xander knew he was lucky just to have electricity at the moment. Only a week ago, the cable had been shut off because no one remembered to pay the bills. When it finally came back on, it felt like a miracle. Xander had stayed up nearly all night watching TV until his eyes burned. Nolan had been there too, though he fell asleep early. Xander had turned the volume down and pulled a blanket over him without thinking twice. It was freezing, and Xander swore the cold seeped into his bones. "Wanna just go over to my place for a bit?" Nolan offers. Xander shrugs and sits up. "Yeah, why not? My dad's probably gonna be home soon, and I'm not really in the mood to deal with him tonight." He grabs his plain black hoodie and pulls it over his head. "But if your brother's hogging the Xbox too, I might lose my mind." Nolan laughs as he stands. "Doubt it. He's probably in the basement working out like always. He's obsessed with these gross protein shakes lately. I think he's just trying to impress Ashley Weiser." Xander laughs. The senior on the volleyball team? I don't blame him. The words come out a little stiff, but Nolan doesn't seem to notice. Yeah, well, don't get your hopes up, Nolan jokes. She'd never date a freshman. They head out of Xander's room, and he flips Jeremy off before pulling his beanie down over his ears. When they step outside, the cold air hits them instantly, along with freezing rain. Wow, it's freezing, Xander mutters. Nolan shoves his hands into his pockets. I don't even like her like that anyway. She's fine, I guess. She's been over a few times. Kinda rude, but my brother likes her, so I try to be nice. You don't have to like someone just because your brother does, Xander says. Trust me. Nolan shrugs. I just want him to be happy. That was one of the things Xander liked most about Nolan, how much he cared about people. His family, his teachers, even strangers. He was kind without trying, optimistic in a way that felt natural to him. Xander didn't understand how Nolan did it. Most of the time, Xander felt angry or restless. But when he was with Nolan, things felt lighter. The only thing that bothered Xander was how Nolan let people walk all over him. Xander often found himself stepping in when others pushed Nolan too far. He never minded. He'd do anything to protect him. Nolan sighs. It just sucks. I know she'll probably hurt him someday, and he doesn't deserve that. Xander smiles softly and drapes an arm over Nolan's shoulders as they walk. You're a good brother, he says quietly. Way better than I ever was. Nolan smiles back. Thanks. And hey, at least I don't threaten my siblings when I'm mad. Xander laughs. Fair point. By the time they reach Nolan's house, they're both shivering. Nolan unlocks the door and gestures inside. Wipe your shoes. You know how my mom is. Always, Xander says, kicking his boots aside. Hey, what's up? Jackson greets them from the living room. Jackson was a senior, athletic but smart, and surprisingly easygoing. Xander liked him. They exchange a quick handshake, one of those wordless gestures Nolan never quite understood. How's it going? Xander asks. Good. Nolan mentioned you got into another fight at school, Jackson says. Heard it got messy. Xander shrugs with a grin. Nothing serious. Nolan rolls his eyes. I don't get why you're so proud. You clearly had the upper hand. Xander just smiles. Nolan didn't like the fighting, but he understood why it happened sometimes. Xander's anger had a way of boiling over, especially when people crossed certain lines. All right, tough guy, Nolan says, grabbing a controller. Let's go play something. They settle onto the couch, the Xbox humming to life. Nolan hands Xander a controller, and as the game loads, Xander relaxes for the first time all day. No matter what they played or how long they stayed up, one thing was always true. Time spent with Nolan was time well spent. Chapter 2. Xander woke up around 4 in the morning that Sunday. He shared a room with 3 of his brothers, but tonight it was just him and Theo. What pulled him from sleep wasn't the cold or a bad dream. It was the sound of quiet sobbing. Xander frowned and pushed himself up on one elbow, rubbing his eyes. Theo, he whispered. Is that you? Theo's sniffles echoed softly in the dark room. Xander could barely make out a small nod. I got scared, Theo said in a shaky voice. I had an accident. Theo was 9 years old and still had occasional accidents at night. Some days he was fiercely independent, doing everything on his own. Other days he needed help with things most kids his age didn't. Tonight was one of those nights. Xander sighed gently and climbed out of bed, padding over to Theo's. He flicked on a small lamp and frowned at the damp sheets. It's okay, he said quickly when Theo's breathing hitched. I'm not mad. I didn't mean to, Theo whispered, covering his face with his hands. Xander knelt beside the bed, his voice calm despite the tiredness pulling at him. Hey, it's all right. Accidents happen. Despite his temper with most people, Xander had a soft spot for Theo. He understood that some things were harder for his little brother, and he never blamed him for that. Theo peeked through his fingers. You're not mad? Xander shook his head with a tired smile. Nope. Come on. We'll clean this up in the morning. For now, just change and sleep in my bed, okay? Theo nodded eagerly. Xander shuffled back to his own bed and collapsed onto it, pulling the blanket up as he yawned. Theo changed into clean boxers, then climbed into bed beside him. "I get to sleep with Bubba," Theo said happily as he curled close. Xander chuckled softly. "Easy there. It's really early. How do you still have so much energy?" Theo shrugged, settling under the covers. "I like having lots of energy. Then I can ride my bike and run around all day." Xander smiled and turned onto his side, facing him. "Why were you crying though? Bad dream?" Both of them had nightmares sometimes. Some were harmless and strange. Others, especially the ones involving their parents, were harder to forget. Theo nodded. "I had a scary dream. A big dog was chasing me and I couldn't get away." Xander felt relieved it wasn't worse. "It wasn't real," he said gently. "You're safe now. I'm right here." Theo nodded, put his thumb in his mouth, and slowly closed his eyes. Xander followed soon after, the room finally quiet again. Xander woke up again around 7 the next morning. Normally he'd sleep much later, but raised voices pulled him from rest. "Where is the money, Richard?" his mother shouted. A loud bang followed, like someone hitting the table. "I told you I don't know," his father snapped. "It was there last night." Xander's stomach tightened when he heard his name mentioned. He carefully slipped out of bed, pulling on a hoodie before stepping into the hallway. It was better to face it now than hide. He walked into the kitchen. "What's going on?" Both of his parents turned toward him. Xander noticed the tension immediately. His father stepped closer, gripping the collar of Xander's hoodie. "What happened to the money that was on the table?" he demanded. Xander's heart pounded. "I don't know," he said quickly. "I was at Nolan's for a bit, then I came home to watch Theo." His father's expression hardened. He shoved Xander back against the wall. "You're lying," he said sharply. "I'm not," Xander insisted, panic creeping into his voice. Xander squeezed his eyes shut as his father raised a fist. "Hey!" someone shouted. Xander opened his eyes to see Seth, his sister's boyfriend, gripping his father's arm and stopping him. "Let him go." His father released Xander and turned toward Seth, but Seth stood his ground. Xander slid along the wall, his legs shaking. Xander didn't know why it mattered so much, but he didn't want Seth to see him as weak. Seth was kind, protective, and someone Xander looked up to, maybe more than he wanted to admit. "Dad, stop," Xander said, grabbing the back of his father's shirt. He was shoved aside and fell to his knees, hitting the floor hard. Seth spoke again, quickly reaching into his pocket. "Here," he said, holding out some money. "Take this and leave him alone. He didn't do anything." After a tense pause, Xander's father took the money and shoved it into his pocket. "I'm going out," he muttered before leaving the house. The room fell silent. Seth turned to Xander. "Are you okay?" Xander slowly stood, touching his nose and wincing slightly. "Yeah, I'm fine." Seth sighed. "I see this happen too often. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." He gave Xander a small smile and gently ruffled his hair. Xander felt his chest tighten and looked away, embarrassed but grateful. "Thanks," he said quietly. "But next time, I can handle it." Seth smiled, not entirely convinced, but proud all the same. Chapter 3. Xander lifted a finger to his chapped lips, signaling for silence. Nolan nodded, his shoulders tense. Behind the counter, the store clerk was deeply focused on a magazine, barely glancing up as he flipped a page. Xander slowly crouched and carefully moved behind the counter, keeping low. The man smirked to himself at whatever he was reading, completely unaware of what was happening a few feet away. The magazine looked old and worn, its corners bent and pages creased. Xander was fairly sure he'd seen the same magazine, or at least one just like it, every time they came in. The store was empty now. Xander and Nolan had waited nearly 20 minutes, pretending to browse, until the last customer finally left. During that time, Xander had quietly slipped a few bags of chips and drinks into his backpack, enough to share with his siblings later. Soft rock music played over the speakers, loud enough to cover the faint sounds of their movements. The wind made the glass door creak now and then. Xander didn't mind the music. Rock had always meant something to him. Maybe because Beckett played it nonstop at home, or maybe because Nolan loved it too. Nolan stayed crouched in one of the aisles, his heart racing. He hated doing things that felt wrong, and his nerves were on edge. Still, somehow Xander always managed to pull him into these moments, convincing him to live a little more freely. Even so, the anxiety never fully went away. Xander edged closer to the counter and reached up carefully. His fingers brushed what he was aiming for, but as he moved, something nearby tipped and clattered loudly to the floor. The clerk spun around, eyes wide. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Xander didn't hesitate. He bolted for the door. "Run, Nolan." Nolan grabbed his backpack and rushed after him. "I'm sorry," he called back instinctively as they burst outside. They ran down the sidewalk, nearly tripping over each other and bumping into early commuters. After turning a corner and putting some distance between themselves and the store, they finally slowed to a walk. Xander laughed breathlessly, running a hand through his hair. Nolan lightly smacked his arm. "You said we wouldn't get caught." Xander shrugged, grinning. "Close call, yeah, but we made it." He glanced into his bag, satisfied. "We'll just avoid that store for a while." Nolan shook his head, kicking a small rock along the sidewalk. "I'd really like to go my whole life without ever dealing with the cops," he muttered. Sometimes being around Xander scared him. Nolan didn't want trouble, didn't want to ruin his future. But Xander's confidence, and the way he always acted like everything would be okay, made it hard to walk away. Xander draped an arm around Nolan's shoulders. "Hey, I've got you. Always." Nolan smiled up at him. They'd been inseparable since they were 10, ever since meeting at summer camp. Nolan had gone for the adventure, sleeping under the stars. Xander had gone because it was free. Somehow, that summer had changed everything. A cold breeze made Nolan shiver, and he pulled his jacket closer. "Did you finish the math study guide?" Xander chuckled and shook his head. "Nope. Got home, dropped my bag and went straight to the garage. Beckett's been teaching me stuff about cars. It's actually pretty cool." Nolan sighed. "You know you could do both. You're smart, you just don't try." Xander's reputation at school wasn't great. Teachers expected trouble the moment they saw his name. He rarely did his work, and his temper didn't help. Nolan, somehow, was the only person who could calm him down when things got out of hand. "It's just freshman year," Xander said as they reached the school doors. "I'll figure it out later." Their high school was small and underfunded. Classrooms were crowded, and the building always felt cold. "Future habits start now," Nolan said lightly as he opened his locker. Inside were neatly stacked books, constellation photos taped to the door, and an extra jacket hanging on the hook. Xander smiled. "You really love giving advice." Nolan laughed. "Only because I care." Xander slept through most of his classes, except gym. Dodgeball was his favorite, fast, loud, and an easy outlet for all the frustration he carried. Even so, it wasn't enough today. His thoughts kept drifting back to home. To the shouting. To feeling powerless. The anger followed him as he changed and headed toward the buses. That was when someone accidentally bumped into him. "What's your problem?" Xander snapped. The other kid stiffened. "It was an accident. Back off." Xander reacted without thinking. He lashed out once before someone grabbed him from behind. "Xander, stop." Nolan shouted, wrapping his arms around him tightly. "Please." Xander struggled for a moment, then froze. The other boy backed away, shaken, and hurried off. Nolan slowly released him. "Why did you do that?" Xander stared at the floor. "I don't know." He wasn't in the mood to explain the storm inside his head. Nolan sighed. "I'm not judging you. I just don't want you getting hurt, or worse." Xander clenched his jaw. He didn't deserve it, he admitted quietly. "I'm just tired." "I know," Nolan said softly. "Why don't we grab something to eat? I've got enough for both of us." The hallway was nearly empty now. Nolan hesitated, then gently brushed his fingers against Xander's hand. Xander didn't pull away. Those small gestures meant more than either of them ever said out loud. Xander glanced at him. "Can I stay over tonight?" he asked quietly. I don't think I should be alone. Nolan smiled. Yeah, of course. He picked up Xander's bag and handed it to him, and together, they walked out of the school, side by side. Chapter 4. The two boys sat in a booth tucked away in the back corner of the restaurant. Xander barely looked up as Nolan tossed a fry at him. Smile, Nolan said gently. He hated seeing Xander like this, quiet, distant, weighed down by thoughts he never fully shared. It happened more often than Nolan liked, and it scared him sometimes. Xander was fighting battles Nolan could only partially see, both at home and inside his own head. The hardest part was that Xander almost never talked about it. Every time Nolan asked how he was doing, he got the same answers. I'm fine, or just drop it. Nolan knew those were lies, and he was getting tired of pretending they weren't. Xander rolled his eyes and took a bite of his burger. I am, he muttered. Nolan shook his head. No, I mean a real smile. Not the one you use when you're trying to act okay. Xander sighed and shrugged. I can't today. It's just one of those days. Nolan nodded. He knew exactly what that meant. Those days came too often, and Nolan worried they would eventually pull Xander into that numb, hollow place he sometimes slipped into. For a 14-year-old, Nolan liked to think he was thoughtful and careful, but when Xander was like this, he second-guessed everything he said. He never knew if he was helping or making it worse. Still, Nolan was stubborn. If he could build a working rocket for a 6th-grade science project, even a small one, then he could get Xander to open up. It would just take patience. Did something happen at home last night? Nolan asked carefully. Xander shrugged again. Same stuff as always. Nothing new. Hearing that made Nolan's chest tighten. Xander accepted things no one should ever have to accept. Nolan had seen how it was slowly changing him, pushing him toward anger, toward reckless choices. Nolan was scared of where it might all lead. Xander, he said softly, just tell me, please. Xander let out a long breath. It wasn't even that bad, he admitted. But my dad just makes me feel weak. And I hate that. I don't know why I freeze around him when I can stand up to anyone else. Nolan listened quietly. He knew what it felt like to be powerless, even if his experience didn't compare. And what hurt most was knowing Xander's fear came from the people who were supposed to protect him. That's not weakness, Nolan said. That's fear. And fear doesn't mean you're broken. Xander shrugged. When my dad's not around, things are better. Mom's different then. He didn't say the rest out loud. The sleepless nights, the racing heart, the way every loud noise made him tense, but Nolan could see it in his eyes. You know you can always come over, Nolan said. Anytime. And tonight, if you want, we could hang out in the backyard. I got a new telescope. That did it. Xander finally smiled, really smiled. You are such a nerd when it comes to space. Nolan laughed. So what? Space is cool. Xander shook his head, amused. You really believe there's something else out there? I do, Nolan said seriously. The universe is too big for it to just be us. Xander watched him talk, watched the excitement light up his face. He didn't care much about space, but he cared about this, about the way Nolan's voice changed when he talked about things he loved. All right, Galileo, Xander teased as he stood and gathered their trash. Ready to go? Nolan nodded, smiling. Yeah. They walked back to Nolan's house together. Xander always felt safe there. Nolan's parents treated him like family, and that meant more to him than he ever said out loud. It might be too cold to stay outside long, Nolan said, but we can still light a fire. I really want to show you the telescope. Of course, Xander said. I know you'll explode if you don't. Nolan lightly punched his arm. Hey! Xander laughed. I'm kidding. I want to see it. Later that night, the backyard glowed with firelight. Xander sat in a lawn chair, carefully roasting a marshmallow. See anything cool? He asked. Same constellations, Nolan said, adjusting the telescope. But still amazing. Can I look? Nolan nodded and shifted aside. Look through here. You'll see Orion. Xander leaned in, squinting through the lens. His grin widened. Okay, that's actually really cool. Nolan's face lit up. Right. Xander pulled back and looked at him instead. The excitement in Nolan's eyes made his chest ache in a way he didn't fully understand. He liked seeing Nolan happy, liked it more than he probably should. "It's beautiful," Xander said honestly. Nolan smiled proudly. "Not as beautiful as me, though," Xander added with a smirk. Nolan laughed and shook his head. "You're impossible." Xander didn't reply. He just smiled at Nolan, his thoughts tangled and confusing. For a moment, he felt the urge to lean closer, to do something reckless and honest all at once. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed right where he was, watching the fire crackle and the stars shine, content to sit beside Nolan in the quiet. For now, that was enough. Chapter 5. Xander woke up to Beckett's loud snoring, the sound completely shattering the quiet of the room. One of the many things he hated about sharing a bedroom with 3 other boys was that it was almost never peaceful. Beckett, be quiet," he muttered groggily. The snoring only grew louder. With a frustrated groan, Xander grabbed his pillow and tossed it at his brother's head. Beckett didn't even flinch. Xander sighed and checked his phone. 5:50 a.m. That meant he had only 10 minutes before his alarm went off anyway. He pushed himself out of bed and stretched, pulling on an oversized flannel and a pair of slightly faded jeans. High school starting at 7:15 in the morning was something he would never understand. His old middle school didn't start until 8:45, and even that had felt too early. "You're seriously annoying," he muttered under his breath. Beckett finally groaned and cracked one eye open. "Not a big fan of you either," he replied teasingly as he sat up and rubbed his face. At 21, Beckett was the oldest of the siblings. To Xander, he was more of a parent than their actual father ever had been. Beckett had always stepped up, always made sure everyone else was okay. Xander admired that more than he ever said out loud. He wasn't great with words, but he showed his appreciation in small ways, helping out, listening, being there. Xander flipped him off lazily. "You working today?" Beckett nodded while pulling on a shirt. "Yeah, but I get paid today. I'll grab groceries, and if there's extra, maybe a pizza." That alone felt like a victory. Eating out was a rare treat in their house, something that almost never happened. "Nice," Xander said. "You still fixing your friend's car, or is it still a lost cause?" Beckett laughed as they walked into the kitchen and set out 2 bowls. "Still a mess, but it's getting there. He's bringing more parts later. I'll work on it after my shift. You want to help?" Xander nodded immediately. Working on cars with Beckett was one of the few things that truly calmed him. The garage, the music, the focus, it all helped quiet his mind. "Yeah. What time you getting home?" "Probably around 7. After groceries, we'll head out there and work on it." "Sounds good," Xander said with a grin. "Hey," Beckett added, picking something up from the counter and handing it to him. "Don't forget these." Xander groaned as he tucked his hearing aids behind his ears. "I keep telling you, I don't need them." "Yes, you do," Beckett replied firmly. Xander didn't argue. He knew better. After finishing his cereal and zoning out to the TV for a few minutes, Xander grabbed his bag and headed outside. Nolan was already waiting on the sidewalk. "Hey," Nolan said with a grin and a small wave. "Ready for another boring day?" Xander teased. Nolan rolled his eyes. School was one of the biggest differences between them. Xander couldn't stand it. Nolan, on the other hand, genuinely loved learning, especially science. He worked hard, studied constantly, and never made Xander feel bad for struggling. "We're doing a lab today," Nolan said excitedly. "Some kind of chemical reaction. The teacher says it's going to be amazing." Xander smiled despite himself. "You can tell me about it at lunch." "I will," Nolan promised as they walked down the street together. "All I've got today is a test," Xander added. "Didn't study." Nolan frowned. "I could have helped you." Xander shrugged. "I know." Truth was, he'd never really tried in school. Even as a kid, trouble followed him. Sometimes it was easier to act out than to deal with everything waiting for him at home. And on the rare occasions his mom showed up instead of his dad, he realized that maybe attention, any kind, was what he'd been chasing all along. "I don't need help," Xander said quietly. "I can handle it." "I know," Nolan replied. "I just want to help. Like how you taught me to defend myself. Xander laughed. That's different. How? Nolan asked. Never mind, Xander said, shaking his head. They walked the rest of the way in silence. The hallway was loud and crowded, filled with shouting and slamming lockers. Xander hated this place. To him, it was just another reminder of everything he wanted to escape. You want to go to class? Nolan asked. Or hang out with the others? Let's just go, Xander replied. They reached the stairs when suddenly Nolan was shoved hard against the lockers. You better have my homework done, a boy sneered. I told you I wasn't doing it, Nolan said, standing his ground. Xander stepped forward immediately, shoving the boy back. Back off. I can handle it, Nolan said calmly. The bully scoffed. You won't always have him around. He's not my bodyguard, Nolan snapped. The boy shoved Nolan in the stomach. Xander reacted instantly, pinning the bully against the lockers. Touch him again and you'll regret it. Xander, stop. Nolan shouted. The bully pushed free and stormed off. You didn't have to do that, Nolan said, upset. Every time you fight for me, it just makes things worse later. Xander froze. I was trying to help. I know, Nolan said. But I need to learn to handle things myself. Xander clenched his jaw. Fine. If you don't want my help, then I'm done. He turned and walked away. English class dragged on, and Xander never showed up. Nolan wanted to text him, but pride held him back. Deep down, he knew part of his frustration was with himself. He didn't want Xander getting in trouble because of him. He couldn't imagine school without him there. By lunch, Nolan spotted Xander sitting alone at their usual table. Hey, Nolan said softly as he sat down. Xander nodded. I'm sorry about earlier, Nolan said. I just want to handle some things on my own. Xander nodded again. I get it. I'm sorry too. I should trust you more. Nolan smiled. Apologies didn't come easily for Xander, and that made this one mean even more. Thanks, Nolan said, nudging him. That tough guy act almost cracked. Xander laughed and lightly punched his arm. Don't get used to it. It never took long for them to make up. Sometimes all they needed was a little space before finding their way back to each other, just like always. Chapter 6. He was scared. No, Alexander was genuinely terrified. And it wasn't because of the police station or the metal cuffs still pressing against his wrists. It was the thought of who would be coming to pick him up. If it was his father, the consequences would be far worse than anything the officers could do. Xander silently hoped, almost begged, that it would be his mom instead. It had actually been a relatively quiet year for him. Considering it was already late October, this was only the second time he'd ended up handcuffed and sitting in a police station. Most of the other trouble he'd gotten into had gone unnoticed, something he took a strange pride in. He usually managed to stay under the radar. This time, though, he'd been careless. He'd had his back turned to the front counter while slipping a bag of snacks into his backpack when the store manager caught him. Before he could react, a hand grabbed the back of his shirt and pulled him behind the counter. Xander had considered running, until he noticed something tucked beneath the counter that made him freeze. Running suddenly didn't feel like an option. Now he sat on a hard chair, his foot tapping nervously against the tiled floor. His wrists ached from being cuffed behind his back. The officers had briefly removed them earlier, but once Xander started acting out, they went right back on. "This is the last time I want to see you here," one of the officers said firmly. He was young, tall, and looked more tired than angry. "Do you understand?" Xander rolled his eyes. "I've heard the speech before. About having time to change, making better choices, all of that." Before the conversation could go any further, the front doors opened. Beckett walked in. Relief washed over Xander instantly. Beckett wasn't his legal guardian, but the officers knew him well enough. Most of the time, they let him take Xander home. "You here to pick him up?" the officer asked. "Yes, sir," Beckett replied. The cuffs were removed, and Xander stood up, rubbing his wrists. "You're free to go," the officer said. "Don't make this a habit." Yeah, Xander muttered. "Let's go." Once outside, Beckett stopped him. "This needs to stop," Beckett said quietly but firmly. Xander crossed his arms. Stop what? You know exactly what, Beckett replied. You want to end up like him? Xander stayed silent. Beckett gently grabbed his face, forcing him to look up. Do you? No. Xander snapped. I don't want to be anything like him. Don't compare me to him. I'm not, Beckett said calmly. But whether we like it or not, he's part of us. That doesn't mean he gets to decide who you become. I just want you to be smarter. I want you to do better than I did. Xander knew Beckett was right. He knew he could be more. But knowing something and believing you deserved it were two very different things. Can we just go home? Xander muttered. Beckett sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Yeah. Let's go. The truck ride home was quiet. The heater barely worked, and cold air filled the cab, but neither of them complained. When they walked inside, Ray was on the couch watching TV with Theo, while Jeremy slept in the recliner. Where are Mom and Dad? Xander asked. Mom's working, Ray replied. Dad passed out in their bathroom. Xander winced. At least not ours. He dropped onto the couch beside Theo, who was holding a box of cookies. Did he eat dinner? Xander asked. Yeah, Ray said. I made mac and cheese. Xander shook his head. I think cookies are fine. Theo giggled. You're not supposed to eat cookies for dinner. Xander smiled and took one. Good thing I've got you to keep me in line. Theo nodded seriously. And you have to shower more. Beckett says you're getting smelly. Xander shot Beckett a look. Seriously? Beckett laughed. It's true. Deodorant. Every morning. Jeremy stirred. Gotta stay presentable, he teased. Especially if you want to impress someone. Xander rolled his eyes. Whatever. Jeremy smirked. You don't talk about girls much. Xander stiffened, his face heating up. Back off, Beckett warned. Xander stared at his hands. He didn't say anything. He was only in 9th grade, but rumors spread fast. Who liked who was dating. He never cared about any of it. Because every time the topic came up, his thoughts drifted somewhere else. To Nolan. The realization unsettled him, but he pushed it aside, hoping, telling himself, it was just a phase. Chapter 7. Come on, it's fun, Nolan, Xander said, taking another sip from the bottle. He flashed a crooked smile and held it out. Just one sip. Nolan rolled his eyes but took the bottle anyway. You're ridiculous, he muttered before taking a cautious drink. Almost immediately, his face twisted. That burns, he coughed, handing it back as Xander laughed. Nolan had tried a little wine before, but this was completely different. It felt sharp and unpleasant, and he couldn't understand why Xander liked it, or why he drank it all. Xander shrugged, taking the bottle back. Guess you're not used to it. The two of them were stretched out against Xander's bed, the bottle mostly staying in Xander's hands. Nolan had tried to talk him out of drinking before, but he'd learned that it rarely worked. Well, you can enjoy that, Nolan said. I'm done. My mom would definitely notice if I smelled like this. Then just stay the night, Xander replied casually. No one here really pays attention. And it was true. Most of his siblings drank, and his parents were usually too distracted to notice anything at all. Nolan nodded slowly. I'll sleep on the floor this time. Usually, when they stayed at Nolan's place, they shared his bed without much thought. Sometimes one of them would wake up to find the other had rolled closer in their sleep. But at Xander's house, that never happened. Nolan suspected it had something to do with Xander's dad, so he never argued, though he didn't love being on the floor. Xander shook his head. I'll take the floor tonight. Maybe one of my brothers will be out, and I can steal a bed. All right, Nolan agreed. Xander handed him the bottle again. Nolan sighed. Just so you know, I'm not making this a habit. Xander chuckled. That's what I said once too. Nolan took another small sip, immediately grimacing. This is peer pressure, and I don't like it. Xander laughed and took the bottle back. After a while, the weight in his chest felt lighter. His thoughts slowed, drifting in a direction he usually tried not to follow, toward Nolan. Toward the way his lips moved when he talked, the way his smile made Xander forget everything else. He knew he was staring, but he couldn't seem to stop. Just a quick kiss, he thought. Nothing serious. He leaned in slightly, then froze. What? Xander asked, snapping out of it when Nolan spoke. I asked if you want to make something to eat, Nolan said. My mouth tastes awful now. Xander blinked, then nodded. Yeah. Food sounds good. Pizza bagels? Perfect. They headed to the kitchen together. Xander pulled a box from the freezer, arranged them on a plate, and slid it into the microwave. He sighed and hopped onto the counter while they waited. So, I saw this thing online, Nolan said excitedly. You can make constellations with a lamp. You poke tiny holes in the lampshade in the shape of stars, and when you turn it on, they show up on the walls. I really want to try it. Xander smiled. That actually sounds really cool. Nolan practically glowed at that. Compliments from Xander always made his chest feel warm. The microwave beeped. Xander grabbed the plate and immediately winced. Oh, okay, that was a mistake. You should have waited, Nolan laughed. Xander shrugged. I'm starving. They sat back down on the bed. Xander glanced over at Nolan again. Whether it was the alcohol or just courage he'd been holding back, he wasn't sure, but before he could stop himself, he leaned in. His hand brushed Nolan's cheek as their lips met. Nolan pulled back instantly, eyes wide. I didn't mean, Xander started, panic rising. But then Nolan leaned in again. This time, Xander didn't pull away. He relaxed, his eyes closing as the moment settled into something gentle and real. It felt unreal, like something he'd imagined too many times to believe was actually happening. For once, the world felt quiet. And right. Chapter 8. After they pulled away from the kiss, the room fell into an awkward silence. They sat side by side, neither quite sure what to do next. Xander's mind was racing. He didn't even understand why he had leaned in. He knew he wanted to kiss Nolan, but that didn't make sense. He wasn't gay. He was sure of that. At least he thought he was. So, Xander muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Nolan nodded, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. So, are you gay? He asked quietly. No, Xander answered right away. Nolan nodded quickly and looked away. Yeah. Me neither. I don't really know. Xander felt his chest tighten. He had been scared of a lot of things in his life, but this was worse. Worse than his dad yelling. Worse than getting in trouble. He would rather deal with all of that than lose Nolan. The thought that one kiss might have ruined years of friendship made his stomach turn. So, Nolan asked carefully, if you're not gay, why did you kiss me back? Xander swallowed. If you're not gay, why did you kiss me first? They stared at each other for a moment before Xander let out an awkward laugh. I think I'm just a little tipsy. Nolan nodded quickly. Yeah. Me too. They both knew that wasn't really true. Nolan had barely had anything to drink, and Xander wasn't nearly far gone enough to do something like that without meaning it. But neither of them wanted to dig deeper, so they let the excuse sit between them. Xander was relieved Nolan didn't push the question. He wasn't sure how he would have answered. So, want a pizza bagel? Xander asked, holding out the plate. Nolan nodded and took one. Thanks. Xander set the plate down, then stood up. Actually, I just remembered, my mom wanted me to do the dishes before she gets home. She'll be really mad if I don't. He hesitated. So, I think I'm gonna head out now. But I'll talk to you later, okay? Xander nodded. Yeah. See you. Nolan left quickly. The moment the front door closed, Xander let out a long breath and ran a hand over his face. What did I do? He whispered to himself. What confused him most was that Nolan had kissed him back. For the next hour, Xander lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding too loudly for sleep. He planned to stay there all night, until he heard his mom's voice echo through the house. Anyone home? Xander got up and went to the living room. His mom was leaning against the wall for balance, her coat slipping from her shoulders. Her hair was messy, her smile wide and unfocused, her cheeks red from the cold. Mom? Xander asked carefully. Where were you? She smiled and shrugged off her coat. Oh, Alexander, she said warmly, stepping closer and gently cupping his face. Look at you. You're getting so handsome. When his mom drank, she was usually one of two people, angry and loud, or soft and overly affectionate. Tonight, she was the second one. And as much as he tried not to, Xander clung to those moments. He didn't get them often. "You've had a lot to drink," Xander said gently. "Why don't you lie down?" No, she said, shaking her head. "I just want to sit with you. We don't talk like we used to." Xander remembered a time when things were different. When his dad wasn't around, when his mom baked cookies and played music and laughed more. Those memories felt distant now, but they still lived somewhere in his chest. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's sit." He guided her to the couch and grabbed some water. "This might help." She chuckled. "You're one to talk. I can smell it on your breath." Her smile faded slightly. "I know I'm not the best example, but you shouldn't be drinking, Xander." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." She sighed and brushed his hair back. "How's my boy? We haven't talked in a while." Xander wanted to tell her everything. About Nolan, about the kiss, about how scared he was of what it might mean. But the words stayed stuck. "I'm okay," he said instead. She studied him. "You sure?" He nodded. "Yeah." "Really?" She squeezed his hand. "I'm trying to do better. I promise." Xander smiled faintly. He'd heard that promise before. He wanted to believe it. He always did. "I know," he said softly. His mom laughed when he joked about wanting a new game console, and for a moment, things felt almost normal. Xander knew his mother loved him. Even on her worst days, that part was real. The real problem, the shadow over everything, was his dad. More than anything, Xander didn't want things. He just wanted peace. And for things to stop hurting so much. Chapter 9. Like most mornings, Xander walked the short distance down the street to Nolan's house. But unlike most days, his heart was racing. He wasn't even sure Nolan would be waiting for him after what had happened the night before. Xander had barely slept. No matter how hard he tried to focus on anything else, even after talking with his mom, his thoughts always circled back to Nolan. The memory of the kiss replayed over and over in his head. The fact that he had started it still didn't feel real. It wasn't something he would normally do. For so long, he had convinced himself that if he ignored his feelings, they would eventually fade. Now, he wasn't so sure. To his surprise, Nolan was standing in his usual spot outside his house. His hat was pulled low over his ears, his hood up as light snow drifted down from the gray sky. "Hey," Xander said quietly, offering a small smile. "Hey," Nolan replied, returning it. Once Xander reached him, they started walking toward school together. After a few steps, Nolan spoke again. "So, about yesterday?" Nolan wasn't even sure how to bring it up. He was confused himself, but he knew that if they avoided the conversation, things would only become more uncomfortable. "I don't really know why I did it," Xander admitted. "I was kind of out of it and I wasn't in a great headspace. I think I just wanted to feel close to someone. I'm not, I just wasn't thinking." Some of it was true. He had been having a rough day, and he had wanted comfort. But he also knew there was more to it than that, something he wasn't ready to say out loud. Since starting high school, Xander had heard his friends talk endlessly about relationships and crushes. But whenever they did, his thoughts never went where they were supposed to. Instead, they always drifted back to Nolan. Nolan nodded, staring down at his shoes. "I get that. I kissed you back because I'm confused," he said softly. Xander glanced at him. "Confused about what?" Nolan swallowed. "I think I might like guys. Or maybe I'm gay. I don't really know yet." His heart felt like it was pounding in his ears. It was the first time he had ever said it out loud to anyone. "Oh," Xander said quietly. "That's okay." Nolan looked up at him nervously. "It is? Like, if that's really how I feel." Xander smiled gently and draped an arm over Nolan's shoulders. "Yeah. No matter what, you're still my best friend." Nolan let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I was scared you'd be mad. Or think I was weird." "I won't," Xander said. "I might joke around sometimes, but I'd never be upset with you for something like that." Nolan leaned into him slightly, feeling lighter than he had all morning. He had been terrified of losing Xander, but now, at least, that fear was gone. Even if Xander didn't feel the same way, Nolan told himself he could handle it. Eventually, they made it to school and headed to their first class. Like always, it dragged on endlessly. Nolan kept nudging Xander's ankle to keep him awake while the teacher went through notes. "Nolan," Xander whispered. "Look." Nolan glanced over to see Xander leaning back with a pencil balanced under his nose. "Alexander," the teacher snapped. "Sit up. How many times do I have to tell you to pay attention?" Xander straightened quickly, the pencil clattering to the floor. "Honestly, Mr. Brown? I've lost count." The teacher shot him a look. "Keep it up and you'll earn yourself a detention." Xander sighed. All right, I'll behave." When the teacher turned back around, Xander leaned toward Nolan. "You owe me. I only stopped messing around because I know you'd be mad if I got kicked out." Nolan smirked. "But maybe if you tried that more often, teachers wouldn't hate you." The rest of the morning passed without incident. By the time lunch rolled around, Xander headed to his usual table where Ava and Wyatt were already sitting. Ava was scrolling on her phone, her lunch untouched. Wyatt looked up and grinned. "What's up, man?" "Hey," Xander replied, sitting down. Wyatt handed him an envelope. "My brother said this is for yours." Xander took it with a nod. "Thanks. I'll let him know." Soon, more friends joined them, filling the table. Nolan arrived last. "Move over," Nolan said, nudging Xander. Xander shifted so Nolan could squeeze in beside him. Their shoulders brushed, and Xander felt warmth creep into his cheeks. "What took you so long?" Xander asked. "I was talking to my bio teacher," Nolan said excitedly. "She wants me to join the science club. She said I'm one of her top students." "That's awesome," Xander said honestly. "You should totally do it." Ava leaned toward Xander with a grin. "So, are you busy tonight?" Xander shrugged. "Not really." "Want to hang out after school?" "Sure," he said. "What time?" "We could walk to your place together." Xander hesitated and glanced at Nolan. "That cool with you? You can come too if you want." Nolan forced a smile. "It's okay. I'm staying after to help someone with biology." Xander nodded. "All right. I'll meet you after school, Ava." As Xander smiled at Ava, Nolan felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He looked away, trying to ignore the flicker of jealousy that crept in, telling himself it didn't mean anything, even if part of him wished it did. Chapter 10. Xander smiled as he approached Ava at her locker. "Hey, you ready?" She smiled back, wrapping a maroon scarf around her neck and flipping her strawberry blonde hair over her shoulder. "Yeah, let's go." Ava reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. She was a few inches shorter than Xander, petite, with loose curls that fell down her back. Xander felt his face warm as he glanced down at their hands. A part of him wished, guiltily, that it was Nolan standing beside him instead. He tried to push the thought away. The kiss with Nolan had been just that, the kiss. Nothing more. Still, holding Ava's hand made him feel uneasy, like he was doing something wrong, even though he knew Nolan wasn't his boyfriend. The whole situation left him confused and restless. "So," Ava said casually, "I was thinking we could hang out in your room this time. No offense, but Jeremy kind of gets on my nerves." Last time Ava had come over, Xander had made sure they stayed in the living room with his siblings. Being alone with her made him nervous, not because she was a girl, but because he simply didn't feel that kind of connection with her. "Yeah, sure," he said. "Theo might be in there, though." She shrugged with a soft smile. "Maybe. Guess we'll see." They walked inside, and Xander kicked off his shoes. Jeremy was sprawled on the couch with an Xbox controller. "Wow," Jeremy teased, glancing at Ava. "Nolan really changed his look, huh?" Xander rolled his eyes. "Very funny. We're going to my room. Is Theo in there?" "Nope," Jeremy replied. "Beckett had a meeting after school. Think they're grabbing food later." Xander swallowed, nerves tightening in his chest. He hadn't expected to be alone with Ava. Still, he nodded and led her down the hall. "Sorry it's messy," he said as they entered the shared bedroom. Perks of sharing a room with 3 other guys. It's fine, Ava laughed, sitting on his bed. It's not that bad. They chatted for a bit, mostly about school. Ava brought up some gossip, and Xander played along even though it didn't really interest him. You know, she said after a pause, resting her hand lightly on his leg, sometimes I wish I had a real boyfriend. Someone I could hold hands with and spend time with. Before Xander could respond, she leaned in and kissed him. He froze for a second, surprised. His mind felt disconnected from the moment, like he was watching it happen from somewhere else. Something didn't feel right, but he didn't pull away. After a brief moment, he gently eased back. Ava looked shy, brushing her hair behind her ear. I hope that was okay, she said quietly. Xander forced a small smile. Yeah, it's okay. Before he could think too much about it, Theo suddenly burst into the room, holding up a painting with a huge grin. Xander! Look what I made. Xander quickly shifted his attention. Wow, Theo. That looks awesome. Beckett followed close behind, taking in the scene with a raised eyebrow. Alexander! Not now, Xander muttered. Beckett sighed. We'll talk later. The rest of Ava's visit was spent in the living room with his brothers, watching a movie, sharing snacks. When she finally left, Xander sank onto the couch, exhausted. You need to be careful, Beckett said calmly. Xander sighed. Nothing happened. Relax. I'm serious, Beckett replied. I'm just looking out for you. Xander snapped, his frustration bubbling over. Stop acting like you're my dad. The words hung in the air. Before Beckett could respond, Xander stormed back to his room, slamming the door behind him. Later that night, Xander quietly stepped into the hallway. That's when he heard his father's unsteady voice. Where you goin'? Xander backed up instinctively. His father smelled strongly of alcohol, his eyes unfocused. I'm not doing anything, Xander said quickly. Without warning, his father lashed out. The impact sent Xander stumbling back into the wall. Pain flared, sharp and disorienting. Dad! Beckett shouted, rushing in. He pulled their father away and guided him back toward his room. Go lie down. Now. Once the door was shut, Beckett turned back to Xander. Hey, come on. He held out his hand. Xander took it, shakily pulling himself up. His lips stung, and his head throbbed, but what hurt more was the familiar realization that this wasn't how things were supposed to be. I'm okay, Xander muttered. Beckett studied him, then pulled him into a firm hug. I'm sorry, Xander whispered. I didn't mean what I said earlier. I'm just scared. That's okay, Beckett said softly. But you don't have to handle everything alone. Xander swallowed hard. I love you, Beth. I mean it. You've always been there for us. Beckett smiled, holding him a little tighter. No matter how broken things felt sometimes, the Valentine siblings knew one thing for sure: they would always protect each other when it mattered most. Chapter 11. That morning, Xander and Nolan went to school separately. Nolan had to get in early for some extra help, and he wasn't going to lie, he was kind of glad. He was still upset that Ava had gone to Xander's house the night before while he had been alone. Nolan knew he had no right to feel jealous. It wasn't fair to try to keep Xander to himself. But it was hard to share sometimes. As he walked to his first class, he silently hoped Xander wouldn't be around yet. He didn't want to be reminded of yesterday. Wait! Xander suddenly called. He grabbed Nolan by the elbow and steered him into the nearest bathroom. Nolan's eyes widened as he stumbled inside, the door slamming shut behind them. After a moment, Xander released his hold. What are you doing? Nolan asked. Ava's coming this way. I don't want to talk to her right now, Xander muttered, tapping his foot nervously. After what had happened the night before, he didn't want to run into Ava until he had to, most likely at lunch. That night, after everything with his father and after the kiss with Ava, Xander had lain awake for hours. Even after his brothers had fallen asleep and Beckett's snores filled the room, Xander couldn't rest. His stomach twisted with anxiety, and tears pricked his eyes. It wasn't until nearly 4 in the morning, after taking some NyQuil with a glass of milk, that he finally drifted off. Nolan frowned. Did you two fight or something? Xander shook his head. For some reason, he didn't want to tell Nolan about the kiss. It was strange, since they usually shared everything. No, we didn't fight. Nothing. I just don't want to talk about it right now. Nolan rolled his eyes, clearly seeing through him. Come on. Tell me. What happened when you hung out? Xander bit his lip, hesitating. It's nothing, we kind of made out a little. He could have sworn he saw a flash of jealousy cross Nolan's face, but he didn't mention it. It just happened. I didn't even want it to. I don't like her that way, Nolan. I don't know what to do. Nolan placed a comforting arm across his friend's shoulders. Hey, it's okay. We'll figure it out. Xander let out a helpless chuckle. Why do I have to be such a mess lately? You're not, Nolan said with a small shrug. You've just got a lot going on. He glanced toward an empty stall before leaning over and pressing a quick kiss to Xander's cheek. Xander's eyes widened, and his face turned red. You said it helped last time, Nolan said shyly. So, I thought maybe it would help. Xander smiled softly. Thanks, he whispered. Come on, let's get to class. They left the bathroom, and thankfully, Ava was nowhere in sight. Xander exhaled in relief and adjusted his bag as they headed down the hall. The first half of school passed slowly, and Xander dreaded lunch. He thought about skipping it but knew that would raise suspicion. When the lunch bell rang, he reluctantly gathered his things and made his way to the cafeteria. He slid into his usual seat at the back, and Wyatt smirked at him. What's that look for? Xander asked. I heard about you and Ava. Didn't know you liked her back, Wyatt said with a shrug. Xander sighed. That's the thing, I don't tell her, but I don't think about her that way. She made the first move, and I just went along with it. You seriously don't like her? Dude, That's Nolan's seat, Xander interrupted. Ava walked over and sat down beside him. I don't think he'll mind if I sit here today, she said softly. Under the table, she reached for Xander's hand, but he quickly placed both his hands on the table instead. Nolan approached, a puzzled frown on his face. Did we switch seats? Just for today, Ava said with a smile. Is that okay? Nolan sighed and sat in the other seat. I guess it's fine, he muttered, pulling out his lunch. For most of lunch, Ava leaned closer to Xander, trying to get his attention. Their sides pressed together, and Nolan noticed. Normally, it was Nolan sitting beside Xander, not her. He tried to keep his jealousy in check. It wasn't Xander's fault he was straight, and it wasn't Ava's fault she liked Xander. Nolan just had to adjust to the fact that they might actually date. When the lunch bell rang, Ava smiled and kissed Xander on the cheek before leaving, the same cheek Nolan had kissed only hours before. So, are you two a thing now? Tyler asked, raising an eyebrow. Xander shook his head. Not your business. Tyler laughed. All right, Xander. Catch you later. Xander exhaled and slung his bag over his shoulder. Ready to go? He asked Nolan. Nolan nodded. So, Ava sat in my seat today. Xander looked down. I should have said something. Are you mad? I'm not, Nolan said with a small smile. But can I have my seat back tomorrow? Of course, Xander replied quickly. I'll make sure she knows. I missed sitting next to you, Nolan admitted. Yeah, me too, Xander said, grinning. The rest of the day was filled with notes and a test that Xander hadn't studied for. As the final bell rang, he heard his teacher call him over. Mr. Valentine, come see me. Xander groaned. Catch you later, Wyatt. Wyatt nodded with a small smile and left the classroom. What did I do this time? Xander muttered, approaching Mr. Peterson's desk. Mr. Peterson, a younger teacher with neatly combed blonde hair and a kind demeanor, looked up at him. There's a test tomorrow. Planning to study? Xander shrugged. Maybe. You have an F right now, Mr. Peterson said gently. If your grade doesn't improve, you'll have to retake the course. I can tutor you, come early or stay late, whatever you need. I don't need tutoring, Xander said. Clearly you do. Are you not trying, or do you not understand the material? Xander stayed quiet. High school often felt pointless. What was he even working for? Mr. Peterson leaned forward. If there's something going on at home, you can talk to me. I can help, Alexander. Xander looked down at the floor, rubbing his lip. Okay, he murmured. I'll see you tomorrow. Make sure you study, Mr. Peterson said, smiling. Xander nodded. Thanks, Mr. Peterson. For the first time since starting school, he actually wanted to study, not for anyone else, but for himself. Chapter 12. Xander found himself awake late that night. It was nearly midnight, and for once, he was actually doing homework. He sat at the kitchen table with his math book open for the first time all year. The pages were worn and slightly torn from previous years, but to Xander, it was all new. His algebra notes were spread out in front of him. They had been blank that morning until Nolan had texted him his filled-in notes. Once Xander received them, he worked on completing his own notes and then tackled every blank worksheet he could find. Most were wrinkled, crumpled, and buried at the bottom of his backpack under old books, only now being addressed. He had been at it since 5 that evening and was still going strong. It was taking him so long because there were so many assignments to catch up on, many of which should have been submitted in the first month of school. Xander hoped, against all odds, that his teacher would at least accept a few of them. He had both headphones in, blasting a David Bowie song, when Beckett came into the kitchen. He was shivering slightly, with a bit of grease smudged on his cheek. Hey, what are you still doing up? Beckett asked. Xander bobbed his head to the music and continued scribbling numbers. Beckett walked over and rested a hand on his shoulder, causing Xander to jump slightly and pull out his earbuds. You scared me, Xander muttered, looking up. Beckett chuckled, rubbing his cheek with a towel. Sorry, didn't mean to. I was still in the garage working on the car. What are you up to? Homework, Xander mumbled, eyes still on his notes. Beckett raised an eyebrow in surprise. Homework? That's a first, isn't it? Xander laughed quietly and shrugged. Yeah, figured I'd give it a try. It's just math, pretty easy for me anyway. Beckett smiled and shrugged off his coat, setting it on the back of a chair before sitting down. Good for you, Xander. Really? I've been telling you for years to do your homework. Beckett had always been an advocate for a better life for his siblings. He wanted them to graduate, maybe go to college, get decent jobs, and live a life without constant worry. Is this because of that girl you had over yesterday? Trying to impress a future Harvard student? He joked. Xander chuckled softly. No, I'm doing this for me. And her name's Ava. I've had her over once or twice before. Beckett nodded. Do you like her? He asked, pulling a cigarette from his pocket and lighting it. Xander put his pencil down and looked across the table. Honestly, no. He didn't like her in that way. He liked her as a friend. She was kind and funny, but he wasn't attracted to her. The word, attracted, only ever made him think of Nolan, his best friend. Not cheerleaders, not popular actors, not anyone else. It was Nolan. I don't know, he muttered, avoiding Beckett's eyes. He couldn't imagine telling his brother the truth. Beckett would probably laugh, and Xander wouldn't blame him. Beckett held out the cigarette, and Xander took it, grateful. Something on your mind? Beckett asked softly. Xander froze for a moment, caught off guard. He thought he was good at hiding his feelings, but apparently not. No, I'm fine. Just because I'm doing homework now and don't like Ava doesn't mean something's wrong. Just asking, Beckett said gently. Xander raised an eyebrow. Asking what? I notice how quiet you get sometimes, Beckett replied softly. Like with Jeremy the other night. Xander's face flushed, and he shot his brother a sharp glare. I'm not weird, he muttered. Cut the act, Alexander. I just want to talk because I worry about you. You're my little brother. When Nolan's around, look at him differently. Talk to me. I'm not judging. Xander stared at him, heart hammering. He was terrified Beckett would hate him if he told the truth, but he was exhausted from holding it all in. I don't know what's going on, he said, voice shaky. He placed a hand over his face, tears pricking his eyes. I'm so scared. Beckett got up and placed a hand on his brother's back. Scared of what? I don't know. When I kissed Ava, I didn't feel anything. But the other day, when I kissed Nolan, it just felt so right, Xander whispered, a tear slipping down his cheek. Beckett gently pried Xander's hands away from his face. Listen, I don't care if you like boys or girls. All I want is for you to be happy. If you're happy, I'm happy. Xander stared, unsure if he had heard correctly. Beckett had never seemed like the kind of person to be so accepting. I don't know what I like yet, he mumbled, hands trembling. Xander, it's okay. You're not broken or weird. Just, whatever it is, know you can talk to me. Xander nodded. Okay, he whispered. Beckett smiled, ruffling his hair. Come to bed soon, he said, heading back to his room. Xander watched him leave, a small smile appearing on his face. For the first time in a long while, it felt good to talk about what was going on in his head. Thanks for listening to today's BL story. If it made your heart skip a beat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Only here on BL Stories, where love knows no limits.